Great. Thank you so much, Fan, and thank you everyone for being here this morning. Looks like we have a pretty healthy number of folks on the line and certainly excited to kick it off with our friend Joe from Ario and kind of talking about what the latest is in AR and VR for industrial applications. I think, Joe, if you would start your video and camera, I think we'll get off to the races here.
Okay. Can you see me?
Yep, we're good. Perfect. And I think I just want to kick this off, a little brief introduction on my end. My name is Mark. I'm here with our plug and play team on the venture side. And, I focus on mobility and industrial technology alongside my colleague Fan, who was just talking earlier. And, really excited to hear from you, Joe. Maybe you can give a little bit of background on yourself and about Ario.
Yeah, so my name is Joe Weaver, CEO and founder of Ario. So we're a startup. We were founded in 2016. We specialize in augmented reality for enterprise, where we're helping enterprises build a platform and integrate an AR into their daily operations. So we help enterprise really focus on digitizing their information and then using AR to bring their information spatially. So that way it's easier to interact with and building a better way to communicate within these industrial environments.
Awesome. And I think, maybe just to set some baselines and understanding for the group, I'm curious as to where you see the slider between AR and VR and maybe in like a cost savings mindset, what some of the benefits of both technologies are, or maybe even considering mixed reality and some of the other nuances in the spectrum.
Yeah, so I've been in the AR VR space for 15 years now, and it's definitely evolved, from like the early adopters where we were first doing, AR with military, and even 15 years ago, it showed a lot of potential. But I would say in the last 5 years, it's got really to the point where now it's being adopted more broadly and commercially. So when it comes to cost savings, I look at, VR is great for planes, trains, and automobiles, where it's really great for that simulating those digital environments remotely and more efficiently. When it comes to AR, really the value proposition for that is on the job training. So taking all that virtual benefits and then bringing that to the actual work site, to the actual people training and operating on the daily basis. So really, it's kind of two foundational technologies where you see a lot of use cases in VR for digital training, and then how do you transition that digital training to actual operations? And that's where I think augmented reality bridges that gap from the virtual world to the actual real world.
Gotcha. And I think, something when we think about like AR and maybe surfacing a lot of that data and digital information, as you mentioned, I personally am not exactly familiar with where all the information comes from. So, curious as to the kinds of systems that you have to integrate to make these kinds of solutions work. And I guess the effort that might take from, for example, a client of yours.
Yeah, so we see, there's kind of a couple of trends happening. IoT, where a lot of things within these plants are communicating to the internet. Within the next 5 years, 1 billion plus things will be connected to the internet. So that becomes a really big interface problem. How do we consume all that information? How do we connect that information so that way humans can interact with it? And that's where I really feel that AR is going to be that bridge where you'll be able to point your phone or tablet or even wearable, be able to just innately be able to interpret what it's looking at and convey that information. When we see companies transition, you kind of have two approaches. They already have a lot of data. So if you look at these companies, they traditionally have SAP, Oracle, Siemens. So the first thing we help them do is transition that data spatially, and then we add new layers of information that they not necessarily have today as far as video content, 3D model content, interactable video chat. Those are things that additional layers that we see over the information they already have. But really the first step is transitioning all the 10, 30, 40 years of information they have digitally to that new realm of AR, VR.
Gotcha. And would you, I guess, like in my mind, it sounds to me like that's kind of what differentiates these kinds of fully integrated solutions from maybe what in the early days AR was perceived as more like a little bit gimmicky. I hesitate to say that, but something where maybe it wasn't so fully integrated as to be powerful enough for like enterprise applications, I guess. Is that where like the backend data integration and working with all the historical data kind of comes in?
Yeah, so I think that as this technology progressed, a lot of it was just initial pilots where companies tried AR to see what ROI it would have, but that doesn't necessarily scale too easily. So in these environments, they've already invested a lot of money and time into their process and procedures. What they're looking for is new ways to interact with it and better ways to interact with it at scale. So even though AR has been really promised as a game changer, it hasn't really transitioned to the masses effectively because it's traditionally very hard to develop or bring these things to market. So at ARIA, we really focus on kind of four things to transition something from a pilot to actual production. The first thing is in making something very simple. So if you're 16 to 60, it has to be able to operate and work within that age range. So all workers that potentially can use the platform. The second thing is security. That's something that in enterprise is very keen as far as how do I make something secure if I'm pointing my phones or tablets at something. How do I protect the information that it's capturing? Also, how do I protect the information, on the back end and the front end? The fourth thing we've really looked at is scalability. So how do I transition something from, instead of just 10 employees to thousands of employees? And that's where wearables have kind of fallen short, where a lot of companies have adopted wearables, at a small scale, but it really hasn't transitioned to mass adoption throughout all companies yet. In the next 5 years, we can kind of see that progressing, but it's still the early phases where phones and tablets now have this AR capability, and we're seeing where that can now enable these new experiences. And the last thing we really focused on was sharing. So being able to connect information, share chat, share images, share videos, and really build that content is really where that ROI, that value stream starts actually being implemented by augmented reality.
Gotcha. And before I just want to jump in here quickly for the audience, feel free to submit questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those at the end of this conversation. So excited for that as well. But I guess to touch more on mass adoption, do you think that there's been that kind of lag also comes from these kinds of solutions maybe not surfacing the right kinds of information or the right kinds of context for there to be action taken like in an enterprise use case? Or where is that kind of breakdown for adoption coming from?
Well, I think it's traditionally building AR, it was a very complex process. You had to hire developers, you had to go build complex content, and really what this holy grail of seeing like all this 3D animations, all this stuff, most of these enterprises don't have any 3D content to even begin with. Either the OEMs or the manufacturers hold all that information. So what we've seen is that the fastest way to adopt this stuff is kind of take an approach where, how do I gain value? And that's really, for us, been showing, that pathway of saying, okay, we're going to give you a tool to create content. We're going to give a tool to manage content, and then we're going to give a tool to help communicate. And all those three things together are enabled by the end user to manage content, build content. And it can be as simple as just creating videos and having it spatially waiting for the worker. That's, very fast compared to like 3D modeling, which could take, countless hours or some level of expertise that might not drive enough ROI or value fast enough within these enterprises.
Gotcha. And I guess maybe, yeah, thinking and returning more to the cost saving lens, for this whole series, but where do you see, your tool and AR in general improving cost savings for like industrial use cases? Is it more on saving time and certain processes, just making people more efficient in general? How would you kind of characterize that?
Yeah, so I think it kind of falls into two buckets. one of the buckets is that digital transformation and helping build, the skills gap. So how do I transition new employees faster? So, over the next, 5 years, you're looking at 25% of the industrial workforce eligible for retirement. So with that, you're going to have to enable new tools to empower the new workforce. So we've seen where, not only looking at how do I take my processes digital, but how do I also future-proof myself? So that way, whenever wearables are ready, that information is spatially contextualized and presented to my employees. But that's one kind of area where AR can help transition that skills or capture that knowledge and then store it in a way that's spatial, that can be conveyed to more workers faster and more efficiently. The second thing we've seen really is reducing downtime. So in these companies, downtime is very measurable ROI, sometimes between $1,000 to $22,000 a minute. So any ways that you can help reduce downtime by communicating more effectively, or by being able to understand information faster and better and more efficiently with the workforce you have, really helps drive down ROI. And those two are the areas that we've seen where, as far as problem statements, really transition where AR, VR can help transition and really drive ROI.
Gotcha. And I think you've touched on wearables a few times here. In my mind, these kinds of solutions, as you mentioned earlier, are driven by, recent developments in cell phones and mobile devices. Where do you see wearables kind of coming into that picture? I'm curious.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of research with different customers and military in the past with wearables. Everybody wants to be hands-free and have that experience, but it's just not mass adoptable yet. So, a good example is, if Apple's not doing it, it's probably not ready for the mainstream. So the instant, one AR is ready as a wearable, I believe it's just going to take off like a wildfire. And there's really good signs that, in the next 5 years, that's going to be, an interface that will transition the world, the same way iPads and iPhones transitioned how we communicate and how we interact with the web and the next internet. That's kind of where we see it going. But right now, phones or tablets are state of the art. You have this year iPads with LiDAR, being mass deployed, which is amazing to think that you can buy a tablet now that has 3D sensing capabilities built into it that works phenomenal. So as this technology evolves, we want to be wearables, but we want to build a path that's reasonable or makes sense to consumers.
Yeah, definitely. I think we'll probably touch on that in a second. I'm looking at the Q&A box. Excited to kind of get to that LiDAR integration to everyday kind of tools, I suppose. And maybe kind of a final question or something to touch on. Can you speak to a deployment with a particular customer or a situation in which there were those really tangible kind of ROIs in terms of cost savings from deploying REO's solution? Just kind of give an idea to the folks in the room here.
Yeah, so when we look at a pilot, you really want to justify ROI at the end of it. So a lot of the use cases where we've gone through from pilot to production is really understanding what value augmented reality can bring, but then also looking at what that transition from digital to actual production goes. So the first thing we try to do is work with like the low-hanging fruit. We try to look at some area within the production line that is having issues or large amounts of downtime, and then we try to use our platform to develop the procedures and bring that spatially to that piece of equipment, and then we really focus at the end of the pilot is capturing all the analytics. So that way we can go back and say to the end customer and say, all right, this is the metrics you had before REO, and here's the cost savings post. And if you can show, 35, 50% reductions in downtime, that's a huge value proposition to an end customer. When you talk, every minute is $1,000 to, $2,000 a minute. If you can go through a pilot and end of it and say, hey, in this 90-day pilot, for this one procedure that we implemented, we saved you, $35,000 per, changeover, or $35,000 per line downtime. And then you can easily extrapolate that math across the mass adoption of this, and you start getting to insane numbers of productivity increases for these end clients. So it really starts exciting them to see where adapting this technology very quickly can start really driving ROI in a meaningful, tangible way.
I mean, yeah, that sounds super awesome. And I think a question in terms of how these solutions are deployed, having seen, I guess, like a few solutions on the predictive maintenance side, and, generally talking to startups, there's always also a layer for kind of like management to view the results in real time. Since this is a tool for people on the ground, is there also a kind of a backend layer for REO that people who are maybe more on the administrative side can see and deploy and kind of target, certain types of operations or certain types of tasks potentially?
Yeah, so that's really critical to building that case study or building that results of your pilot. So we have a web dashboard that lets you manage users, create content, manage content. So you can create tasking, you can create quizzes, then you can deploy those and do process changes and updates based upon the data you're getting from the mobile phones and tablets of the workers interacting with the platform. So that value proposition of being able to go back and look at how long those processes took, and then going and say, hey, on step 4, that was causing this weird data point where 90% of people were doing it in 30 minutes, and then we had 2 super experts that were doing it in 15. So how can I go back to those experts, capture their knowledge, and then reinforce the procedures to get that new cost benefit to expand that knowledge capture? So we really see where it's building those positive feedback loops, where first you need to capture the data, then you can start analyzing it to understand how to build those process improvements. But a lot of these companies, they maybe know how long processes take, but they don't necessarily know the minutia of what data points each individual step or each individual process can have implemented to increase productivity.
Yeah, or even like the cross workforce optimization, or kind of redistributing the knowledge, I guess, amongst different people to make things go faster. That sounds really neat. And I think we have a few more minutes here, and kind of going to jump into Q&A. So a reminder for folks on the line, feel free to continue posting questions through that Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. We have a question from Dan here, going back to LiDAR and kind of some of these new technologies included in devices. Yes, what impact do you think new LiDAR cameras and sensors on the next wave of phones and tablets will be? How can enterprise continue to leverage?
Yeah, so we've just got our hands on LiDAR about a month ago on the iPhone, on the iPads, and it really is building that magical moment where it just works. So for an end customer, you really want something that, when it comes to AR, if it works 25% of the time or 75% of the time, it's not ready for mass adoption or production. With LiDAR, it's really starting to get to that point where I can just have AR experiences where I can just point my tablet, and 100% of the time it will place that information where and when it's needed most. So that's where I think really where this technology, LiDAR, is really bridging that gap between having the user experience just seem flawless. And we've seen that in high-end devices, with like Magic Leap and HoloLens, where you can just walk in a room and magically the AR virtual things are just there. And I think that's where we're going to be at with the new phones and tablets, is that these experiences are going to transition to that point where it traditionally, took some time to place or interact with those experiences, to be instantly being able to, walk in a room and your phone will interpret your environment to a level of understanding that will just seem to the end customer as just magically things are existing in your world, and there's no level of self-development or correction within the application to make those experiences feel better or more secure to an end customer.
For sure. And I'm sure on your end, as far as deploying these kinds of solutions, the more kind of native adoption and kind of developer tools, I'm sure that we've built out the kind of inclusion of this new technology will probably be really helpful to spin solutions up faster. And I think I'm curious here. It looks like you answered a question while we were talking, but do you think that not natural experiences with glasses are somehow hindering further adoption for large scale AR industrial use cases, similar to kind of what we had with 3D TVs and lack of adoption there?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the AR world for a long time, and I've been on the hype cycle of I have wearables, every one of them. The problem is that it's just not ready for mass consumption. It's a hard thing to say, because you really want that experience and you want to drive that experience for the customers down the road. But it's just one of those things that it's difficult. You can't. People just don't have experience working with these things, developing to these platforms, and they're cost prohibitive. $2,000, $3,000 is just not something that can be easily procured or implemented within these organizations. So we've really took the approach of saying, okay, well, what drives value? It's really that spatial context. How you get it is really, now thanks to AR Core and AR Kit, Apple and Google devices have magically turned into the most advanced AR devices on the market, which overnight, is just amazing to think there's 1 billion plus devices that have this new capability. And people are just starting to scratch the surface of what this capability can start doing on the masses on the whole. So, and these experiences are feeling a lot easier to manage and update on things and devices that they already own or operate. So for us, we really see the future will be wearable, but realize that it's going to be something that, will be down the line. But we don't want to miss that future. And we most enterprises, they have, a 5-year mission. So we want to help them drive that vision of saying, when these devices are ready and when they're ready and mass adoptable, that your form factor will change, but your content and the information you've created will not. So that's where we see, that future vision being implemented.
For sure. And hopefully with Ario, the content and all that's created will already be there, ready to be leveraged. So sounds really great. I think, given that last question, that's about time for us, but I really appreciate your time, Joe. And this was a super great conversation and hopefully a good warm up for our audience and for the rest of the startups that are on the line today.
All right. Hey, thank you.